Hi, thanks for joining us for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. I'm Chris Cooper. Hummingbirds are a fun addition to any garden. We'll show you how to set up a hummingbird feeder. Also, the fruit has set. We'll talk about what you need to do to keep the bugs at bay. That's just ahead on the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Goodwin's Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the Family Plot. I'm Chris Cooper. Joining me today is Mitch Robinson. Mitch is the Conservation Education Manager at Strawberry Plains Audubon Center. And Mr. D is here. Thanks for joining me.
Glad to be back.
All right, Mitch, the hummingbirds are here.
They are here.
All right, I've heard a lot of people talk about the hummingbirds. I can't wait to get some at my house. So here's the question, though, that everybody likes to ask. What about hummingbird feeders? You know, how do you locate them? Where do you go to purchase them and things like that? So can you enlighten us?
Sure thing.
Okay.
So there's a variety of hummingbird feeders out there on the market.
Okay.
This is the typical one that we sell at Strawberry Plains. Another place you could get here in Memphis is Wild Birds Unlimited. But you can even go to general places like Walmart, I think will sell them. It really just depends on what you're looking for. We recommend these because they're sturdy, they're glass, they hold up well over the seasons. But your next question was about the location?
Yeah, but where do you locate the feeders themselves?
So we just say, where do you like to hang out? Where do you like to eat dinner? Maybe have a beer after work? Typically, where's your relaxation spot? Because hummingbirds are highly mobile. They're gonna move to the spots where they sense the nectar. And so I recommend, you know, maybe a back porch or outside your kitchen window where you might do dishes or, you know, prep your dinner.
Okay.
Just as long as there's enough space, you know, a good foot to 2 feet between that and the window or building itself.
Okay, makes sense. Now, what about cleaning it?
Well, cleaning it, you know, it's a lot easier than it seems. You know, it's basically, the nectar is just a sugar water solution. You know, we mix 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. Real quick, I'll just say we use hot water. Don't need to be boiling, but the sugar does need to be dissolved in the water. And so we typically take a large gallon jug and fill it with sugar part, then add hot water, shake it up. Once that the sugar is dissolved, just tap it off with cold water, and you're ready to go. You can store that in the fridge and use it for the next couple of days. So when it gets time to clean your feeder or you see that it's empty, we recommend washing it out each time that you do bring it in. Basically, you just unscrew. You can hold this under the faucet itself with some hot water, rinse it out. Should be good to go. But if you do get some black mold or anything like that, we recommend not using soap, using just a light bleach solution, like a 1 to 10, and that should clear it out. As for actual scrubbing, we do sell these types of devices that can scrub the inside of the glass itself. Fits down. I won't stick it all the way in because it's not wet, but you can scrub it out. And then again, with the actual feeding holes themselves, we also have these type of scrubbers that go inside the hole and get any type of particulates or such that might have gotten in there and clogged it.
How about that? Now, when do we need to take our feeders down?
Well, that's the big question. We recommend you do not take them down.
Do not?
Actually, that's correct. So a lot of people have been concerned, oh, if I leave my feeders up, the hummingbirds won't know to go south and they'll stay here throughout the winter. Actually, hummingbirds have a much more innate sense of time and when to go than we actually give them credit for. And a lot of the work that's been done by some individuals with the former Hummingbird Study Group on the coast in Alabama were the first to recognize this, that there's a lot of species of not the ruby throat, which is what we get mostly west of the Mississippi, but western species will actually sometimes get pushed over in storms and will actually overwinter here. And so we have several species that have been noted throughout the past decade that have overwintered throughout the whole season here in Mississippi. So we say, unless there's a reason for you to take it down, you know, someone's complaining about it, we say leave at least one up and just kind of check it throughout the season.
Wow, so just leave it there. Okay. So no concerns about the rough winter weather or anything like that?
Well, you know, if they're here, we want to give them something to eat. So, you know, definitely check on it. At times we've had overwintering birds that it has gotten well below freezing, and we've even set up kind of areas where we'll put some heat lamps on it to ensure that mixture doesn't freeze.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about the native plant sale.
Yes, sir.
So what do we need to know about that?
So our native plant sale is May 15th and 16th. It is one of the biggest outreach opportunities we have to talk about the importance of native plants to both support and attract wildlife to your home and garden. During that plant sale, we'll actually be doing a program. I'll be facilitating at 1 p.m. each day. It's going to be free to the public, and it's part of the National Audubon Society's new Hummingbirds at Home program. You can go to it at hummingbirdsathome.com. It's a web-based smartphone app as well as website app that encourages individuals of all ages and backgrounds without any science or bird background. You can significantly contribute as a citizen to the scientific work that's being done to understand how hummingbirds are being affected by climate change. If bloom periods are happening at earlier times than we anticipated in the past, how are the birds reacting? And so it gives you an opportunity to input not only the amount of birds they're seeing, but what are they feeding on? And that's going to influence a lot of our understanding about these birds' life cycles in the future.
How about that?
Yeah.
Mr. D likes that. Pretty good. Let me ask you about this though, Mitch. So how did you become interested in hummingbirds?
Well, it's kind of par for the course working at Strawberry Plains. Okay. We're kind of known as the hummingbird center of the Southeast, but I have to say it really was being so intimately connected to them on a daily basis, working there over the past year. Being able to sit at lunch and look out and count anywhere from a dozen to 2 dozen hummingbirds, somewhat violently going at each other, fighting for this food for such a small, beautiful little specimen. It's just fascinating how such a small creature can have such a massive migration pattern and be so specifically focused on returning every year to the same areas to breed. Just absolutely remarkable creatures.
Yeah, that's what I think is so remarkable about it as well. Mr. D?
Do you ever have any problems with pests getting in your hummingbird feeder like raccoons?
Raccoons, not specifically. Ants are the big issue. Another little thing that we suggest, you can actually make these if you wanted to get crafty, but it's basically just a little cup that will be suspended from a string, the same one your hummingbird feeder is suspended from, and you just fill it with water. It'll keep out ants, but it'll also serve as a water source for hummingbirds. Hummingbirds don't depend just on nectar, they eat insects. Oftentimes people will ask, well, where did my hummingbirds go? They were here and they disappeared. Well, during this time of year, a lot of those first hummingbirds you're seeing are scouts, and they may actually be leaving the area and heading further north to their original breeding grounds. But as you move further into the season and into the summer, the females, when their eggs hatch, will actually be feeding their feeding their nestlings solely insects, most of which are butterfly and moth larvae, caterpillars.
Wow. Okay.
So oftentimes if you just see a lot of activity and then the next day it diminishes, that's often the possibility is that the birds have either moved on to their grounds or they're actually feeding insects.
Hornworm control.
Hornworms. I was thinking the
There
same
you
thing.
go.
Yeah.
There you
When
are.
you say caterpillars, I was thinking about that.
If you do have pests on some of your fruits and vegetables, it may not be a bad idea to have some hummingbird feeders nearby.
It's not a bad idea, especially near your vegetable garden.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not too bad. So this goes on top. I want to explain that one more time.
So the string hangs down from here to the feeder, and then above this you'll have another string that hangs to either the shepherd's hook or to the overhang from your roof. And
They drown on their way to the honey.
they do,
or the
they do,
sugar
and maybe
water.
there's something else that'll eat those ants. The only other thing we've had issues with is sometimes bees will congregate and the birds will have to compete with them. We've heard that if you can actually put a pan below the feeders, if it's an area where you're not going to be walking around much, with just that same solution, the bees would rather spend their time much more in that pan where they have more of a resource than having to fight the hummingbirds. So
Makes sense. Makes sense. Mitch, we appreciate that information.
absolutely.
All right.
There are a number of gardening events going on in the next couple of weeks. Here are just a few that might interest you.
All right, Mr. D, let's talk about home orchard care.
Okay.
And we actually just learned something. Maybe we can hang one of these hummingbird feeders
That's right.
in our orchard to
that's a
take
good
care of those
idea.
little insects.
Be a good
Yeah,
idea.
we thank Mitch for that information for sure.
Be worth trying.
Yeah.
The thing that I know I've got apple trees and blueberries and blackberries in my landscape, and everything that I've got sort of finished blooming except for the blackberries, and blueberries are still blooming. But my fruit trees, my apple trees, are through blooming. I know there may be some fruit trees that are still blooming out there. The thing you need to keep in mind with peaches, plums, and nectarines, you pretty much have to control two things on peaches, plums, and nectarines. You have to control the plum curculio, which is an insect, or it can destroy your fruit. And you have to control brown rot, which is a fungal disease. And there are other fungal diseases that attack them, but those are the two biggest problems in peaches, plums, and nectarines. Okay. They really need to be sprayed during bloom with just a fungicide because the early stages of brown rot occur during bloom. So if you have blooming fruit trees out there, I would put at least a couple of applications, early bloom and a late bloom, maybe even a mid-bloom application of just a fungicide. And I think Captan is probably one of the most common.
It is.
Common ones out there. But there are home orchard sprays out there that already have the insecticide and the fungicide mixed together. There's several out there under several different trade names. But do not use one of those home orchard sprays while the plants are blooming, because you can kill hummingbirds. And I'm not hummingbirds. You can kill honeybees.
Honeybees.
And not hummingbirds, but you can kill honeybees, which are very important to pollination. If pollination doesn't occur, you don't have any fruit.
Right.
So do not put an insecticide out there while the plants are blooming. Now, after all the petals have fallen off and after you're past bloom, then the simplest thing to do is just to go with one of the home orchard sprays. It's already mixed up for you, and you need to spray, every 7 to 10 days up until harvest. And if you do that, and if the rain doesn't wash your product off, you should have nice, clean, healthy fruit. You also need to be thinking about thinning the fruit. This is too early, really early to do that right now, but it's very important that you control brown rot and plum curculio, or you won't have any good fruit to thin.
Wow.
On peaches, plums, and nectarines. Now, apples and pears, you can get by with being a little more lax on those. They do have rots, several different fungal diseases that they get.
Fire blight.
And which is bacterial, and they do have insects that will get in them. But if you want good, clean fruit, then you need to follow a spray schedule. Basically, spray schedule. And if you're in dry conditions, you can stretch that out to 10 days. If it's raining every day, you need to spray every day, because if the rain will wash your product off.
Wow. And
fungicides, for the most part, are preventative in nature, and they're prophylactic treatment to prevent fungal diseases. And if that treatment is washed off, you have no protection. So,
like it never happened.
So, and the problem we have in our area is there are weeks that it rains every day, and that's why it's such a challenge to control insects and diseases on especially peaches, plums, and nectarines. Because if you go a week and it rains every day, there's no way you can keep that protective coat of insecticide and fungicide on there. And if a female plum curculio lands on your fruit, she makes a little semicircular cut, lifts the flap up, lays an egg under it. So you can actually go to the fruit, the little small fruit, and if it's got a little half-moon shaped scar on it, that egg's already been laid, that little caterpillar is in there. And even the hummingbird can't get to it. But the insecticide definitely can't get to it inside that. But that's what our commercial growers face. You think in your backyard it's a problem, but the commercial growers face that.
I was going to ask you about Mr. Jones.
Mr. Leewood and Miss Juanita and Henry, they deal with that, all the time, that fruit's forming. Yeah. But that's the way to do it,
Now, do we have to worry as much about diseases or insects with our blueberries or our grapes?
You know, I used to say no.
Blackberries and things like that?
You know, blackberries I'm not having any problems with. I lost my entire blueberry crop last year. I have little bitty young blueberry plants, a half a dozen or so. And I lost my entire crop to an insect called the blueberry maggot. I'd never, ever had to spray blueberries. I'd never seen that as a problem. But every little blueberry had a little bitty critter in it. So now I'm going to have to spray my blueberries with an insecticide this year. I have relatives that had blueberries that did not have that problem.
Right.
I don't know why I had that problem, but apparently, you know, they like my little hilltop over there, and they attack my blueberry plants. So it's just like anything else, the vegetables and everything. You probably I needed to have done a better job of scouting.
Yeah.
And had I seen that happening, and it was over with before I could do anything about it. I got busy. June is when I'm my busiest time of the year, and that's when the blueberries get ripe. And I went out there to pick some blueberries, you know, and there were no blueberries out there. You know, they were all gone. I probably got 3 blueberries on, you know, my plants that survived. So usually, you know, blueberries are one that are pretty much trouble-free. But I'm not sure, you know, I'm not sure that there's anything that that you better not keep an eye on.
Wow.
You know, if you have an excellent crop of blueberries, then you got to worry about birds. You know.
Yeah, that'll be the next thing.
I'll do that. But you know, follow a regular spray schedule if you want to have good, clean, disease-free, and insect-free fruit. And then there are other things that you need to do, like I mentioned. I mean, it's not too late to prune. If you haven't pruned, if you drug around and didn't get your pruning done, you know, 3 or 4 weeks ago when you needed to, it's still not too late. Go out there and you can go out there and prune. And I would do that if you've got a jungle, you know, in your trees. But go on and do that and get started on the spray schedule. Hopefully you did a good job of soil testing and you fertilized. You know, it's not now. It's a good time to fertilize if you haven't put the fertilizer out there. But you know, you can over-fertilize. There's probably more danger in over-fertilizing than under-fertilizing. You know, I think peaches, 2 pounds of a complete fertilizer per tree per year of age, up to a maximum of 12 pounds per plant. You know, and it's broadcast in the drip line, under the drip line of the plant. And apples, it's even less than that. I think apples, a rule of thumb, 3/4 of a pound, up to a maximum of 7 pounds. You know, 3/4 of a pound of a complete fertilizer per tree per year of age, up to a maximum of 7 pounds per plant. You know, but those are the things you can be doing right now.
Okay. All right. Got work to do.
Work to do.
All right. Here's our Q&A session. Mitch, you jump in there with us.
All right.
Here's our first viewer mail. Okay. Jim writes, is there a systemic product to control rust on my iris? I am currently spraying Daconil. And he said it helps.
Are you aware of a systemic product that will control rust? Yeah. And that's the thing.
I'm not aware of one, especially for homeowners. I wouldn't be aware of one.
As I mentioned earlier, for the most part, fungicides are preventative in nature. There are some that have a little bit of kickback activity, but for the most part, fungicides are preventative in nature. And so they are a pesticide that if you want to control diseases, you have to put them out on a regular basis to prevent the disease from occurring. You know, you don't have to put them out forever. You put them out when new foliage is coming out, and you know, just control it. You know, when the plants are susceptible to the diseases. But insecticides, on the other hand, you know, you can wait until you have a problem. You can see the problem, you identify what the problem is, and you can just treat that problem. But fungicides, unfortunately, we don't have any real good systemic fungicides. We have a few systemic insecticides out there.
Right, there are a few.
That the plants will take up through the roots and go through the vascular system, and there are a few of those. But as far as fungicides, I'm not aware of any real good ones.
No. And what you would need to do, too, is practice, again, you know, good cultural practices.
Right.
Space the plants out, let the air get in there to dry those leaves off so they don't stay wet for an extended period of time. And something else I would do too, Mr. Jim, I would rotate my fungicide. So Daconil, which is chlorothianil, is the active ingredient. I rotate that with Immunox, which is
class.
myclobutanil.
Right.
You know, it's something that I would recommend that you would use as well, you know, to get your rust under control.
Try to prevent resistance from occurring.
That's right. So I would rotate that, Mr. Jim, and that should do the trick for you.
Just remember the disease triangle.
Yeah.
You got to have the host, you got to have the disease organism, and you got to have the proper environment. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of control over the environment unless you're watering at the wrong time, putting too much water out and getting the soil too wet and all that. If you have control over that part of the environment, you can control it. Otherwise, then you got to deal with the host, which you can remove. If you have a severe problem with the same plant year after year, like I used to have with Photinia, I took the Photinia out.
Take it out.
I took that disease problem away. I didn't have Photinia leaf spot anymore because I didn't have any Photinia in it. So, you know, keep that disease triangle in mind.
Yeah. Take it out or resistant varieties.
Resistant varieties, excellent.
Works
you know, hopefully,
pretty good.
And there are some out there.
There are some out there, I'm sure.
Resistant Photinia.
There's some out there. All right, Mr. Jim, there you go. Thanks for the question. All right, Mr. James writes, I have a few hundred fruit trees on my farm. What herbicide should I use around the base of them? Mr. D?
Mr. James, it would be helpful to know what kind of fruit trees you have. However, we can make probably some blanket statements.
Okay.
To control grass, you can use Post or Fusilade. Cefoxidim and I'm not sure of the active ingredients, but Post or Fusilade will control the grasses and will not hurt any fruit tree that I'm aware of.
Okay. The Fusilade is fluazaflop.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the active ingredient for that.
Cefoxidim is Post. And,
okay.
Right. You might be tempted to use Roundup.
I was waiting for you to say it.
You might be tempted to use glyphosate, but I've had some bad experiences with glyphosate around fruit trees, around grapes especially. It makes them do weird things. I mean, they'll grow weird and it can create problems. So I'd be very, very careful. I probably wouldn't. I do not on mine use glyphosate around my fruits, but I do use the grass product that I just mentioned. And you got a few hundred fruit trees. You're more than a homeowner.
Yes.
I would consider you a commercial grower. Now, there are others that are labeled just for apples, and some that are, and some of the pre-emergent products like Solacam and Princep, and there's several of them that may be labeled for one fruit tree and not for others, and you might want to look at those, as many fruit trees as you have,
that's a lot.
to put out early as a pre-emergent product, in an area around the plant.
All right, Mr. James, here's our next letter here. I like this, on a little note card. How about that? I have this green moss on my lawn. What can I spray on it and not kill my grass? Any information would be helpful. That's Mr. RT. What do you think about that one, Mr. D?
You're the weed man in the lawn.
Yeah.
Lawns, aren't you?
Okay. Well, let me say this, Mr. RT. You have better conditions for the moss than you do for the grass.
Right.
Okay, because the moss likes compact soils that are poorly drained, poor soil fertility, and guess what else? Shade. The moss loves that, the grass does not. So that's what you have to do culturally is limb up some trees, get some light in there, build that pH up.
Plant some ground covers maybe.
Maybe some ground covers, better drainage perhaps, or some things that you would need to do, okay? But he specifically asks, what could he spray? So let's address that one. There are some products that you can use to control moss. They usually contain iron sulfate or copper sulfate.
Which will also kill grass.
Which will also kill your grass. So you have to be careful.
But it will kill the moss.
when you're using these products.
That's right.
So Mr. RT, this is, you got to figure out what you're going to do here. You're going to have the grass or you're going to have the moss?
Might want to shift gears and do something a little different there.
Do something
That's what
else?
I would do. I would shift gears and I would plant something that doesn't mind shade, moisture. That's what I would do.
Yeah, because I always say this, you need to put the right grass species in the right location.
On the other hand, you don't have to mow moss very
you
often.
don't.
You don't have to mow moss, and it's green. And
it looks nice. There are a lot of mossy lawns here in Shelby County.
Yeah, something to be said for that.
They keep the leaves off of it and it looks real good.
Yeah.
I have a little moss in my backyard. I know why I have it, because I have these conditions.
Barefooted and walk around on it. It feels good,
All right, Mr. D, Mitch, we're out of time. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
Remember, we love to hear from you. Send us a letter or an email with your gardening questions. Send your email to familyplot@wkno.org. The mailing address is Family Plot, 7151 Cherry Farms Road, Cordova, Tennessee, 38016. That's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching. I'm Chris Cooper. Be sure to join us next time for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Be safe.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Good Winds Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.